Hi, I'm Alan Finney. And just before we get into today's topic, I'd just like to let you know that I'm involved with the Companionship of the Sacred Vine, which is working to get traditional Amazonian ayahuasca centers legalized in Canada. Yes, indeed, legal Amazonian ayahuasca ceremonies. And I'll tell you some more about that later in this video, and there's also a link below in the video description. Anyway, today's topic. I want to talk to you about how ayahuasca was criminalized around the world in a very coordinated fashion by some very powerful global interests. And the first thing we need to know to follow the sequence of events is how ayahuasca left the jungle in the first place. I mean, how did we go from traditional indigenous people in the Amazon jungle to me having an ayahuasca ceremony in my backyard in Canada, which we have done, by the way. And that all started with the ayahuasca churches in the early 1900s. These include Santo Daime, Uneo de Vegetal, and Barquina. And pardon my pronunciation or my mispronunciations. And over the decades, these ayahuasca churches spread worldwide, which is still going on today. So as all that is happening, we also see people in South America setting up addiction and healing centers, which were having tremendous success and still are having tremendous success. And as all this is happening, the Western world, for lack of a better term, started catching on. For example, in Canada, Dr. Gabor Mate was one of the prominent world addiction specialists that started using ayahuasca to treat downtown Skid Row drug addicts with amazing success, I might add. And while that is happening, we had rock stars and other famous people, and Graham Hancock started talking about ayahuasca, and then the cat, as they say, was out of the bag. But once you start attracting that kind of attention with those kinds of results, you can pretty much guess what else is also going on. Because the global interests, the global pharmaceutical industry, couldn't fit ayahuasca into their profitable prescription drug medicine system. And they're not going to tolerate something like this with people talking about expanded consciousness or curing addictions or trauma or PTSD. So as all the good news about ayahuasca starts to hit the streets, the global interests start on their process to criminalize ayahuasca, which took about 27 years or so, or 3 decades. But that little process didn't attract as much attention. And you know, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about the one world government, the Illuminati, or the shadow government, or lizard aliens, or whatever you want to call them. And as it turns out, the tinfoil hat guys got it right. There is a global control mechanism in place, and when I say global, I mean worldwide control of things you can do and things you can't do. And one of the things you can't do in the majority of the countries around the world at this time is to legally ingest ayahuasca. And that all started with the United Nations. And if you don't know the history of that organization, the UN is John D. Rockefeller's little one world government wet dream. And how that works is that the UN has these things called conventions. So they issue these conventions, and then countries pass laws based on those conventions. And most of the world has signed onto this system. Like let's conventionally criminalize ayahuasca. So in 1961, there was the United Nations Convention on Psychotropic Substances, which said dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is some dangerous illegal substance, even though human beings produce DMT in their heads. And of course, DMT is also found in ayahuasca. And this is how they do things. Something gets put in place in 1961, then in 1971 there's another convention, And then in 1988, another convention. And then that's it. Let's all outlaw ayahuasca. And that's how the United Nations controls our so-called democratic countries. Did you ever hear a debate in Canada or any other so-called democratic country about whether ayahuasca should be legal or not? Of course you didn't. There wasn't one. And this is what is known as the One World Government or the New World Order or Illuminati or whatever you want to call it. Some nameless, faceless bureaucrats at the United Nations tell the so-called democracies what to do, and then they trot off and do it. So, as ayahuasca was starting to get all this attention, criminalizing ayahuasca was a creeping little backdoor process that took like 27 years. But apparently, and this is where shit gets really bizarre, the UN didn't really mean to criminalize ayahuasca in the first place. It just kind of happened by accident, which we'll get into in a bit. But right now, here's our commercial break. I want to tell you about the work I'm doing with the companionship of the sacred vine. In Canada, there's something called an exemption application where organizations like the CSV can apply for legal ayahuasca centers. And we've been battling the Canadian government for the last 2.5 years to get our exemption application approved. And right now we're at a critical turning point and we need your help. And there's a link in the description below, so click that and you can support this very, very worthwhile initiative. And this is not only important for Canada, but for the rest of the world as well. This could be a model for other countries, or it could inspire other people to fight this bullshit. So please click that link and make a contribution. It would be ever so helpful at this time. And that's the end of the commercial break. Let's get back to the UN. So what is the United Nations criteria for criminalizing something? Any substance considered to be a grave threat to health and which has no therapeutic value. That's it. Pretty simple, like heroin or cocaine or something along those lines. And this is where the shadow government comes out of the shadows for just a little tiny moment and we catch a brief glimpse of them. This is where you see the true global power control structure in action. Ayahuasca is criminalized around the world and no debate, no nothing. It's a done deal. But this is where things get truly bizarre, and I couldn't make this up if I tried. After the criminal indictment of ayahuasca around the world, the UN claims that they never meant for ayahuasca to be outlawed in the first place. And I am not making this up. The United Nations International Narcotics Control Board has stated several times over the decades that DMT of plant origin, like ayahuasca, was never meant to be criminalized under the UN conventions. And I'll just quote from a letter from the International Narcotics Control Board. I wish to inform you that no natural plant materials containing DMT is currently controlled under the 1971 convention. Consequently, preparations made of these plants, including ayahuasca, are not under international control. However, they also state that some governments may have just decided to apply control measures to ayahuasca as the use of this preparation carries serious health risks. And I love the wording they use. They don't say criminalize, they call it control measures. And it's also just some governments, but the majority of countries around the world have criminalized ayahuasca. But we never meant for that to happen. Wow, shit can get out of hand, I guess. Sorry, oops. Anyway, so what are these serious health risks? Nobody at the UN can tell you because there aren't any. There are no serious health risks to taking ayahuasca unless you're ready to have a heart attack. If you look at the safety profile of ayahuasca, ICEERS, an organization which has actually studied ayahuasca, says you only need to avoid ayahuasca if you have a serious heart condition. That's it. If you're going to have a heart attack, don't take ayahuasca. And I'll leave a link in the description to that organization. So who exactly is responsible for criminalizing ayahuasca? Well, the UN says we're not. We didn't tell anybody to criminalize ayahuasca. In fact, we said just the opposite. And the lawmakers can go, well, somebody says it's dangerous, so we figured we better pass a law. And at the end of the day, nobody's responsible. All this stuff just happened somehow. Sorry, everybody. Little misunderstanding, little cock up. That's it. Wow, we can't believe it ourselves how all this happened. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, who would profit by this little United Nations cock-up, this little mix-up about DMT and plant matter and ayahuasca, and what's a dangerous substance and what isn't? And for that, we have to talk about God. And by God, of course, I'm talking about guns, oil, and drugs. G-O-D, God. These are the three most corrupt global industries on Earth, and that is no Illuminati conspiracy. That's just a fact. Let me refer you to one of my favorite books. It's called Corrupt to the Core, Memoirs of a Health Canada Whistleblower by Dr. Shiv Chopra, who in my opinion is a Canadian hero. He spent 38 years as a Health Canada scientist whistleblower. He took on prime ministers and testified in Senate and parliamentary committees, and he even defied gag orders when they tried to shut him up. This little Indian man had balls of steel. And he wasn't the only one. There was a bunch of his fellow scientists, and they were called the Group of Six by the media, all battling what is called systemic corruption. And how exactly does systemic corruption work? Most Health Canada managers are former pharmaceutical industry executives or have ties to big pharma or big agriculture. In other words, the politicians who are financed by these corporations appoint pharmaceutical industry representatives to positions of power within the Health Canada bureaucracy. And this is what is called systemic corruption, where a public organization that is supposedly set up to do one thing is hijacked by commercial interests to do whatever is best for the commercial interests. So Health Canada is actually working for big pharma and big agriculture. And it's not, it's not just me saying this. Read the book. It's disgusting. And you can still find this book on used book websites. So that's how corruption works in Canada. What about the rest of the world? And for the answer to that question, we just have to look at PubMed, which is the largest website for health industry studies in the world. PubMed is firmly in the belly of the pharmaceutical beast. And if you search for pharmaceutical industry corruption on PubMed, you'll get over 100 studies. The first one is a citation about industry corrupted psychiatric trials. Another one wants to know how to tackle corruption in the pharmaceutical industry itself, and on and on and on. Anyway, lots of interesting reading if you have a spare day or two. And then if you head over to your local bookstore, you can find any number of books on pharmaceutical industry corruption written by doctors or lawyers or priests or whoever. So there is no doubt that we are dealing with a globally corrupt industry. So could a globally corrupt industry manipulate governments, health bureaucracies, and lawmakers to outlaw ayahuasca with their little United Nations backdoor system? Is that even possible in a democratic country like Canada or the other so-called democracies around the world? Is corruption at that level even possible? And for the answer to that question, I'd say yes, indeed, because they've already done it. This is exactly what happened. So there's no conspiracy theory here. This is the global power shadow government in action. It pops up, criminalizes ayahuasca, and then pops back down. And you never, ever hear about it. You just find out at some point in time that ayahuasca is illegal. How did that happen? Who knows? We just know it's illegal because it's in the criminal code. How did that get there? I don't know. This shit just shows up. Sorry. So why did I get into the whole legality issue to begin with? Because there is a way to get around this in Canada. which could then possibly become a model around the world or inspire other people to fight this bullshit. So please consider following the link in this description below this video and contribute to this very, very worthwhile cause at this very critical point. And that's it for me. I'm Alan Finney, and thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at a legal ayahuasca ceremony someday, because if we don't fight for it, it won't happen. Take care and God bless.